We're on Chaf Chesam Beis, on the bottom of the page. Bottom of the page, third to bottom line, first word on the line. Okay, so let's review a little bit outside. We had a machlokes between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel. In the beginning of the Gemara, Rabbi Kiva says that the word v'nitma tells me that she's prohibited to the husband, to the adulterer, and to eat truma if she is a kohen or married to a kohen. According Rabbi Shmuel responds to Rabbi Kiva that you don't need a pasuk to tell me that she's prohibited to a kohen. Again, Rabbi Kiva never said that. Rabbi Kiva said she's prohibited to truma. Rabbi Shmuel's response is that we don't need a pasuk to tell me that she's prohibited to a kohen. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel, according to Rabbi Shmuel's question, Rabbi Kiva truma, ihu kahuna. Rabbi Kiva wasn't talking about kahuna; he was talking about truma, and Rabbi Shmuel responds, telling him we don't need a pasuk for a kohen. What did that have to do with what Rabbi Kiva said? Rabbi Kiva never mentioned anything about kohen. Okay, but let's just pause there for a moment. What we saw yesterday was that, so according to what actually the maskana of the Gemara actually is, that there's 4 psukim. According to Rabbi Kiva, the four of them is one for the husband, one for the adulterer, one for truma, one for kahuna. And Rabbi Shmuel says that you don't need a pasuk for kohen. Once I know she's prohibited for truma, I automatically know she's prohibited for a kohen as well. In other words, if she's married to a kohen, she must get divorced. Now, so what does Rabbi Shmuel do with the extra time that it says v'nitma? He teaches from there that anytime we have a suffix in the Torah, anytime there's a question of doubt, then a doubt that takes place in a private domain, where a human being was involved in the interaction, the suffix is considered tummy, vade tummy. That's what we saw yesterday. We finished the Gemara. We explained that what das l'shal means, that if there's a person involved, which means that we know exactly what happened. We theoretically somebody knows what happened. We treat the suffix as if it's certainty of tumah. So in other words, we have a person was holding a mouse and he touched an apple, or the opposite. He was holding an apple and he touched a mouse. We don't know if he actually touched it or not. The suffix is tummy, unless it took place in the public domain. Somebody's walking down the street. We don't know if he walked over a gravesite or not. We say the suffix. In that case, the suffix is tahar. But in an instance where nobody was witness to the event, so you have a mouse and an apple next to each other. You don't know if the mouse moved the apple. In that case, the apple remains tahar, if nobody was present to observe the interaction. Okay, and that is all learned from the parsha of Sotah. Okay, getting back to the discussion. Moreover, the Rabbi Kiva kahuna minole. According to Rabbi Kiva says she's prohibited to a kohen, her husband, and an adulterer. How does Rabbi Kiva know that she's prohibited to a kohen? Minole, and if you tell me kahuna letzrichikra, that you don't need a pasuk, you don't need a pasuk, because shari asav suffix zayna kizayna. Because what's the question on this woman? The question is whether or not she's a zayna, whether or not she's committed an act of adultery. And the Torah says she's prohibited to her husband. Evidently, that's an indication that the doubt of adultery is treated as if it's a certainty. We treat her like a zona. Therefore, it should be obvious that she cannot stay with her husband, the kohen. Or not just her husband, the kohen. If her husband dies, she can't marry a kohen either. A kohen is permitted to marry a widow. One second. Sorry?
Prohibited to marry it.
A kohen is allowed to marry a widow. He's not allowed to marry a divorcee. So let's say, for example, she's married to a kohen, and her kohen husband dies before he had a chance for her to drink. She cannot marry another kohen. Okay. One second. So if that's the case, then truma nabi like to be crush or also a suffix zaina. Truma also, it's the same set of rules. Let's say she's the daughter of a Kohen. She doesn't have children with her husband. The rule is the daughter of a Kohen eats truma if she gets divorced, unless she's a zaina. Hold on, why do you need a pasuk to tell me that she can't eat truma? If you're telling me that we treat her as a zaina, why isn't that sufficient to know that she's prohibited to eat truma? Why does Rabbi Kiva need a pasuk? To the extent that Rabbi Kiva needs a pasuk for truma, he should also require a pasuk for kahuna, because both of them revolve around the question of a suffix zaina. According to Rabbi Kiva, there are the word vinitma is repeated 3 times, but the 4th time it's vinitma with a vav, which according to Rabbi Kiva is an additional ruba, an additional source for a more inclusive category. So what do they tell me? They tell me that in the category of treating her like a full-fledged zaina with regard to various prohibitions, we include a husband, an adulterer, the adulterer, a future Kohen, and truma. For Rabbi Shmuel, tilsikra exceeding. According to Rabbi Shmuel's version, it only says it 3 times. That's because he holds he's of the opinion that the vav of vinitma is not an addition. So therefore, the word nitma is repeated 3 times. And what does he say? He says chad l'baal v'chad l'bayil v'chad l'truma. 1 for the husband, 1 for the adulterer, and 1 to prohibit her for truma. And since we know that it takes the requirements to eat truma are less stringent than marrying a Kohen. In other words, a wider group of people eat truma, and a narrower group of people can marry a Kohen. What's the difference between the wider category and the narrower and the smaller category? A divorcee. A divorcee is allowed to eat truma, but prohibited to marry a Kohen. So therefore, if I say that a sotah is excluded from the wide category of truma, she's certainly excluded from the small category of being able to marry a Kohen. Okay, but there's just one problem with this. What's the problem? What's the problem? So for that reason, in other words, because kahuna is a smaller category than truma, why do we say the pasuk is coming to include the prohibition of a suffix zaina? To truma, maybe she's only prohibited to marry a Kohen, but she would be permitted to eat truma. In other words, you're choosing a more stringent rule for her, which is truma. Truma, we said, is a more inclusive category. So why are you saying that she's excluded from truma and therefore, by definition, also excluded from kahuna? Only exclude her from kahuna, and then maybe she's permitted to eat truma. Okay, so the Gemara says, okay, for Rabbi Shmuel, we're about 7 lines down on 29a. Why is it that we need a pasuk to tell me truma, and therefore, because truma is a wider category, we can also, and she's excluded from truma, we can also exclude her from kahuna. Dilma kahuna, truma sharia. Maybe the opposite. Maybe say that actually the pasuk is coming to exclude her from kahuna, but maybe she's permitted to eat truma. So Amar Lach, Rabbi Shmuel says, Mistavra dumi de balabayil. Presumably, the category that the Torah seeks to prohibit is similar to the husband and the adulterer. What does this mean? Okay, as follows. Now, when we say she's prohibited to the husband, what does that mean? It means immediately she can't marry the husband. When we say she's prohibited to the adulterer, what does that mean? It means if the husband gives her a divorce, she can't marry the adulterer. The same is true of truma. If a husband gives her a divorce and she is the daughter of a Kohen, she does not go back to eating truma. What is the scenario where she's prohibited to a Kohen? If her husband's a Kohen, she's prohibited because she's prohibited to her husband, not because he's a Kohen. If she gets divorced, she's prohibited to a Kohen because she's a divorcee. The only instance in which she's actually prohibited to a Kohen is if her husband dies. Then now she's a widow, and theoretically she would have been able to marry a Kohen. So it's a different scenario than the scenario of an adulterer. And therefore we prefer to include Truma and say Truma is prohibited, and therefore Kahuna is prohibited as well. Rabbi Kiva, let's say Rabbi Kiva, it doesn't bother him the fact that the addition of Kahuna is a little bit different than the inclusion of the adulterer or the prohibition for her to eat Truma. Vinami Islay, or even if he did care about the difference, it could be he would be of the opinion that says that even though it can be learned from Kal V'chomer, the Torah would write it anyway. Okay, we'll just summarize the next Gemara, outside we saw yesterday, and then we'll go to the bottom of the page of Baby Yom. Summary of this Gemara is as follows. The Gemara originally said, we saw yesterday, Sotah, one of the things, again, we have a question of Tumah, Suffolk Tumah, right? We have a mouse and an apple, and we don't know if the mouse touched the apple, right? It could also be true of a dead body in a chair, we don't know if it touched or not. If a human being was involved in the interaction, I'm sorry, let's stop there. We have a suffix. Just like by Sotah, Sotah is a suffix in the private domain. Obviously, the suffix of Sotah happens in seclusion, and we treat it as a certainty. We treat it as if it's tamei. So too, the suffix of tumah we treat with a certainty. However, there's a concept called dayai. Dayai lovim in adin li'eskidin. In other words, you can't, with the Kal V'chomer, you can learn no more than the original source, which means just like by Sotah, there's other limitations of the type of suffix we're talking about. In other words, we're not talking about any doubt here. We're talking about a doubt that's not really a doubt. Two people know exactly what happened. She knows and the adulterer knows. So it's not really a doubt. So so what we're learning here is what type of doubt can you say that a doubt is considered a certainty only where there's actually people that know what really happened. In other words, there is a person who can provide testimony to the fact. Somebody's there to have witnessed it. And just like Sotah is in the private domain, these type of tumah also have the suffix has to be in the private domain. Okay, so that was the first Gemara. The Gemara in the second Gemara, which we saw yesterday, is that basically we have a second source for that teaches us the fact that there has to be a human being involved in the interaction, because the pasuk basically says that if the meat touched something tamei, can't eat it. If a person is tahor, he could eat it. So hold on a second. If it touches something that's tamei, you can't eat it. What about something that's a doubt, suffix? You could eat it. A person who's tahor could eat it. Well, what happens if it's a suffix tamei, suffix tahor? He can't eat it. Seems to be a contradiction. Is it a suffix tamei or tahor? The Gemara explains very simple. A suffix involving human being, it's yesh by das to show. We can resolve the debate because somebody knows about it, and therefore we treat that suffix as tamei. However, a suffix that does not involve a human being, right? We said that there's the apple and the pendulum, and we don't know which way the wind was pushing it. I guess there was no 24 hours for the Foucault effect. Anyway, there was right, and we don't know if it touched the mouse or not. That suffix is tamei. I'm sorry, that suffix is tahor, because the doubt that does not involve a human being. So the Gemara says, why do you need two sources then? The Gemara explains that if I only had the source of Sotah, Sotah involves a double awareness. There is the adulterer and the woman. They both know what happens. Now, there could be a situation of tumah which also involve a double awareness, where you have two people. One person's tahor, one person's tamei. Right? He's a zava, or he's tamei mes, or mitzvah. In that case, you're right. That case is a scenario we learned from Sotah. But in a scenario where a person is only one side of the equation, i.e., he's holding an apple and dribbling it on top of a mouse, a suffix, whatever, we don't know for sure. So that type of suffix is only a one-sided awareness. The mouse doesn't know if it's been hit, or certainly can't tell you. And therefore, that scenario was learned from this second pasuk of the fact that there's a difference between the person eating the meat, he has to be certainly tahar, and the meat itself, which even a suffix tumah could be eaten. In other words, this second verse teaches me that even if there is a single awareness, just one individual as part of the suffix tumah, it's still, we treat it as tamei in a private domain. That suffix is treated as tamei. Okay, now we get to a very difficult Gemara. I hope I don't make any mistakes today. Even worse, I hope I don't have to make any lengthy corrections tomorrow. So I'll do my best. Okay, let's just review here a little bit of Tumah and Tahara. Okay, basically, as you might expect, Tumah goes in levels. So if you touch a dead body, you become a level below the dead body. If you touch somebody who touches a dead body, you're a level below that, right? If you touch somebody who touched somebody who touched somebody who touched the dead body, so you're the third. Well, at that point, there's no tumah for people. So let's say a apple touches a person who touched another person who touched the dead body. He gets even a lower level tumah, right? And what happens if that apple falls into a drink? It's another level. It's a level below that. These are degrading levels of tumah. So they have names. The first level tumah is called an av hatumah. Av means the father of tumah. Called an av hatumah. How do you become an av hatumah? Very few ways to become an av hatumah. There are basically three things that will create tumah at the level of av hatumah. Number one is a person who touches a dead body. Now, like we said before, and we learned in Chagiga, it's not just a dead body, but it's also the sword that killed him. It's a unique law. You touch a sword that kills a person, and it's only the first sword. If a sword touches a sword, it's not going to work. Okay, maybe even a kohen is allowed to touch the sword, because even though he'll become an av hatumah, kohen is only prohibited dafka to touch it, specifically to touch a dead body. It's machlokes in the Rishonim. We're not going to go there. Okay, very interesting discussion, but not for now. Okay, so again, a person who touches a dead body, av hatumah. Okay, that's one of three. Number two is become a tumah hayotze min haguf, a tumah that results from an emission in the body or some change in the body. What type of tumah we're talking here about? Mitzora. Mitzora is not really a yotze min haguf because it doesn't leave his body. His body just changes, but it's in the same category because it has the same set of rules. Zov or zava, a nida or yelada. So a zov is a male with a specific type of emission. It's a type of seminal emission, but it isn't something we'd recognize today. It's not a seminal emission. A zava and a nida are the same thing. It's a woman who's menstruant. Depends on the timing of it, which would result either in a tumas nida or in a tumas zava. But it's the same. That's something we recognize today. We obviously know what it is, and they're the same category. They're really the same. It's the same type of emission. And a yolada, it's a woman after childbirth. All these type of tumas are in the category of av hatumah. A woman who's given birth to a child, man who's a mitzora, they have a level of tumah called an av hatumah. Because it's yotze min haguf, they have, so typically tumah is transferred. The main method of transfer is touching. It's called maga. It's also through exerting energy, pushing, which would be which we call medrus. If you have a big wagon and you push it with a 10-foot pole, you make the whole wagon tamei. Presuming the wagon is susceptible to tumah, which is another separate discussion. However, tumah and yotze min haguf have a whole other additional ways to make the tumah. One of them is called medrus. Let's say he piles up a stack of chairs like that and he sits just on the top chair. That's called tumas moshav, and the whole pile of chairs is tumah, even though he didn't touch all of them. None of that, he didn't push them either. Okay, and there are other methods as well. We're not going to go into that. The third category of av hatumah is a bug, one of 7 types of bugs. Shortsum, okay, they're not exactly bugs. One of them is a mouse, there's a rat, there's a few other ones, specific types of bugs. Those all create av hatumah. No other way to become an av hatumah. Very important, food cannot become an av hatumah. The only things that are able to become av hatumah are things that can go to the mikveh and become tahar. A person can become an av hatumah. If a apple falls on a dead person, it does not become an av hatumah.
In addition to touching, what about under the same roof? That's not.
No, so that's another thing I should have mentioned as well. So in tumas meis has another feature, which is called tumas oil. In other words, in addition to touching and moving, which is maga and medras, you also have oil. Oil means being in the same room, or it means making a tent, so to speak, tenting above the dead body. So a person sticks out his hand over a dead body, he's tummy because of oil hames.
Is he avatama?
Avatum. Okay. Okay. Now, so a foodstuffs cannot become an avatoma, even if it touches the dead body. Let's go underneath avatoma. This I'll explain to you the traditional understanding. This is how basically the Gemara rules in the rest of Talmud. But obviously, we'll see a lot of this is the part of the core Gemara that teaches what I'm telling you. So some of what I'm telling you, I'm taking for granted. Although we will see that by far, it's far from simple. It's not necessarily the case. So I'm telling you the conclusions. You might have to undo some of those conclusions tomorrow. We'll see that it's not so simple. Okay. An item that touches an avatoma. So you have the bug that crawls on an apple. Again, by the way, food stuff that grows naturally. So you have an apple, a cucumber, a potato, etc. These things will not become tummy until they have hechsher tumah. That means they have to be prepared to become susceptible to become tummy.
Like water.
Water.
Yeah.
Water. It has, obviously, first of all, it has to be disconnected from the ground. There's no tumah while it's connected. But in addition to being disconnected from the ground, you have to pour water on it with the intention of pouring water. If it rained and the guy didn't know about it, it's not hokshel the kabel tumah. The water has to be placed there with intention. Okay, that's another side point. And anyway, this apple can become tummy by touching the mouse, right? Let's say a person touches an avatoma. So he shook hands with a man who's a mitzvah. Shouldn't have been doing it anyway, because you're not supposed to be shaking hands with a man who's a mitzvah. But let's say he did it anyway. That person's a rishon l'tumah. A rishon l'tumah, if he touches a foodstuff item, becomes a sheni l'tumah. A food item could be either a rishon or a sheni. So if you have the apple that touches the mouse, apple that touches a person who touched a dead body, rishon l'tumah. If you have a person who is himself a rishon l'tumah, and he touches an apple, that apple's a sheni l'tumah. Now again, chulin, if it's not saying there's no special status to it, and it becomes tamei, nothing wrong with eating it. You're allowed to eat it. As a matter of fact, obviously it's the case that anything a mitzvah eats is going to be rishon l'tumah, right? And same thing is true with the yeleditz or nida or zav. So that's rishon l'tumah, that's sheni l'tumah. Okay, 1 second. Right, another category very important to mention, which is, let's say you have a person who's an avatoma. He touched a dead body, or he was a zav. And then he goes to the mikveh to become tahar. Once he goes to the mikveh till he becomes tahar is basically the difference between is nightfall, right? To bo Hashem the tahar, he goes to the mikveh first. He has a status called tful yom. Tful yom is treated as if he's a rishon l'tumah. And once nightfall comes, he's completely tahar. Okay, there's another category called mechusar kippurim. Mechusar kippurim is any one of those categories. Tumah yetz and gov, zav zav and idiot ledes. They all need to bring a korban to be able to eat kachim. So we'll see that there's truma is more susceptible to tumah than regular chulin. Chulin meaning non-sanctified. Kachim is the most susceptible to tumah. The way we see this is in mechusar kippurim. With a zav is allowed to eat truma after going to the mikveh and becoming tahar, but he is not allowed to partake from a sacrifice, including, let's say, carbon pesach or carbon shlomim or carbon toida. Any of these sacrifices, he cannot enjoy them. Again, he could eat truma, but he cannot eat a carbon. That teaches me that to eat a carbon is the highest level. It requires the highest level of purity. Okay, 1 second. Okay, again, so we have a person who's a tful yom. A tful yom, we said, is a rishon l'tumah. He touches a loaf of bread, it becomes a sheni l'tumah. Now, truma could be susceptible to become as much as a shlishi l'tumah. And if that truma touches an item of kodesh, of kachim, it can become susceptible to as much as a revi for truma. I'm sorry, revi for kachim. So it's a sheni for chulin, a shlishi for truma, revi for kachim. When we talk about something, so when we talk about chulin, that is a sheni, right? So tvul yom touches a loaf of bread. That loaf of bread, we call it. Now, I'm just trying to so until now, when we talk about we spoke about something being ritually impure, we called it tamei. We'll try to be very more precise now. The terminology is actually more specific terminology. If you're at the last level of tumah in your category, you're actually called puzzle. And if you're at a level above that, you're called tamei. In other words, what's the feature of tamei is that you can actually make another level of tumah underneath you. At the last level of tumah, so if you're a loaf of bread, that's a sheni l'tumah, meaning you were touched by tful yom. Tful yom touches a loaf of chulin. That loaf of bread we call puzzle, not tamei. Together on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Did I lose anybody yet? No. Okay. One more. No.
Sort of. In and
Okay.
out. Yeah.
We'll review this all many times in the next 2 days. Okay. One more point, which is that the concept of klicheres. So klicheres has a very unique set of rules. All these rules apply to everything except for klicheres. Klicheres has its own set of rules. First of all, klicheres does not accept tumah by touch. What?
There, right?
It has to be inside the klicheres. It's suspended inside.
The bugs on the outside.
Exactly. Moreover, a klicheres has a unique concept called a tzmid psil. I don't exactly know how to translate tzmid psil, but basically what it means is it's sealed. If you have a klicheres, it's an earthenware vessel that's sealed, and you put it in a room with a dead body, it does not become tummy. You have a mouse that crawls over it 100 times, does not become tummy. You have a zav who rolls it, doesn't become tummy. The only way to make klicheres tamei is by suspending something inside of it. Moreover, what's unique to klicheres is actually if you suspend something inside of it, everything inside of it becomes tamei without touch. So think of a large klicheres amphora. You have this huge pottery thing, and you have loaves of bread piled up, and somebody takes a mouse and suspends it inside. All the loaves of bread are tamei. What level tumah? Rishon tumah. Because the mouse is an avatumah, and the loaves of bread now are rishon. I think that's pretty sure of that.
The thing that's suspended doesn't have to.
No, it does not have to touch. As long as it's suspended,
If it touches, it's the same thing.
it'll be the same thing. That's the unique rule of klicheres. Okay,
Liquids transferred too much.
I don't want to go there.
Oh, sorry.
Liquid is another whole complicated story. For now, we'll go with I think it might come up tomorrow, and then we'll have to deal with it. At a deraisa level, at a biblical level, liquids transfer the same level tumah, which means that so you have think of let's say a avatumah, right? A person touches dead body, he touches a loaf of bread, right? That loaf of bread is now rishon tumah. If that loaf of bread were to touch a bottle of orange juice, but let's say the actual orange juice touched it, right? So and the way to do it, by the way, is if you poured orange juice on the bread, that's with tumah, we call that a chibur. We consider that a touch, even though the orange juice fell to the waste and the rest of it's in the bottle, it's considered touching because it was a constant stream. If, however, you dripped it, that wouldn't be touching. It'd have to. So you pour the orange juice onto the bread, it's stream. It's the whole bottle of orange juice is tummy. Okay, what level of tumah is the orange juice now? The bottle? No, which would be sheni, right?
Oh, the bottom shouldn't.
The bottom,
Because it would.
because it touched the bread is a rishon. The orange juice should be a sheni.
I think the liquid was transferring the same level.
Oh, so that I didn't want to get to. So biblically speaking, it should be a sheni. And therefore, if it touches truma, if it touches some other item of ulin, it should not provide truma. However, rabbinically, we treat all liquids as a rishon l'tumah. This is one of the 18 gzeros. If you remember in Shabbos, I think it's stuff that beginning, it's the first paragraph of Shabbos toward the end of the paragraph. Talks about a lot of the 18 different rules that were made, and this is one of the rules. Liquid will always carry tumah at the first level. It's not relevant today. Might come in tomorrow. Okay. Anyway, let's begin the Gemara. The Gemara. What we learned is as follows. We learned in the Mishnah. Rabbi Kiva taught that chulin. Not only does chulin as a sheni is tamei and not puzzle. Again, I told you that tumah was puzzle. That a sheni of chulin was puzzle, not tamei. And Rabbi Kiva is saying no, it's tamei. Why? Because according to Rabbi Kiva, you can make a shlishi of both chulin and truma. That's the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. Now, Rabbi Shua was not impressed. Rabbi Shua is obviously one of the five prize students, the leftover students of Rabbi Kiva. And he's not impressed with what his Rebbe says. And he says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai disagrees with you. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai obviously is the teacher of Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said that eventually truma that's a shlishi will become tahor. That means that we won't say that that truma that's a shlishi is possible. We're going to say that that's actually tahor. And that we treat it as tahor today, and for whatever reason, it's a mistake. We're not going to do that in the future, at some point in time. So that's the Gemara's question. Hold on a second. You're telling me it's a mistake. Why is it a mistake? Because there's no pasuk, there's no source. And we akar the ein lo lama tamei. If there's no source, then why is it tamei? Amar Yehudah Amar Rav. So Yehudah says in the name of Rav, minat Torah ein lo. There's no source in the Torah. However, midin kal v'chaymer yeshlei. A kal v'chaymer teaches me that it is possible to make truma into a shlishi. And remember, shlishi l'tumah is called a shlishi l'tumah of truma. We call pasul because you cannot make truma into a revi. So this is the lowest level in its category.
Rabbi, page position again, please.
We're 3 lines from the bottom of the page on 29a. 4 lines. 4 lines. Second one in line. Okay. And what's the point here? Basically, what we're going to try to prove is as follows: that umatful yom shemuter b'chul and paisel b'truma. 1 second. Okay, I have to make a retraction here. Okay, so far the first one. Sorry. Okay, Tful Yom is treated like a sheni l'tumah, and not a rishon l'tumah, like I previously explained. Okay. What's the kal v'chaymer? Umat Tful Yom shemuter b'chul and paisel b'truma. A Tful Yom is a Tful Yom that touches chulin is nothing happens to it. But if he touches truma, he can't eat it. He invalidates it. He's paisel it. Kikar sheni, a second level tuma of a loaf of bread. In other words, a loaf of bread that touches a rishon tuma, and shepaisel b'chulin that it itself is pasul. It's shepaisel b'chulin. It itself is invalid. In other words, it's considered tamei. Ein adin sheyas shlishi b'truma, just like a tful yom. If he touches chulin, it's fine. If he touches truma, it's bad. So too, a loaf of bread, that's a shein el tumah. If it touches chulin, it's fine. And if it touches truma, it should make it bad. It should make it into a shlishi. Chulin is non-sanctified. The root of the word is kollel, as in like days of the week are called yomei hakollel, and it's yomei Shabbos. Kollel is mundane. Now, generally speaking, like we said before, chulin is allowed to be eaten with tumah. There's nothing wrong with eating mundane food if it's tamei. There were a select group of people called I think they're called Talmid Chacham scholars. No, but I mean here in a very specific sense. I don't mean that they were. I think that's what they were called. Chaverim, I think were makbid only on truma, not on kachim. Chaver was someone who's makbid on truma. I think that they would be allowed to eat truma b'tumah. I think it's, or at least at a sheni level. I think it's only the people that were makbid for. I remember there were some people that they never ate chulin out that was tamei. They would only eat tahar chulin. You think of kohanim, people were like that were kohanim, they wanted to be able to eat karbanis, they couldn't have chulin that was tamei hanging around the house. Okay. Eina din sheyatsa shlishi b'truma. Okay, so kikar sheni shepasul b'chulin, eina sheyatsa shlishi b'truma. So if you have this loaf of bread, it's tamei. Again, there's nothing wrong with chulin that's tamei, but it should be able to make a shlishi truma the kohen would not be allowed to eat. Okay, so the Gemara says, hold on, there's no kal v'chomer. Ikla mifrach malak ful yom shekain avatuma. You can't really compare the ability of a tful yom to create tuma to the ability of a food item to create tuma. What's the difference? Like we said, food items can never become an avatuma. A tful yom a person could become an avatuma. So they're incomparable. Okay. So the Gemara says, fine, you're right. You're right. A tful yom of a dead body. You know, he was an avatuma. Hold on, let's look at a different type of tful yom. What about tful yom of sheretz? Somebody touches a sheretz, touches a bug. Status of original tuma. Goes to the mikvah. He has status of what we would equate to a sheinil tuma. Malat tful yom to sheretz came mine avatuma. So you're right. The truth is that here he doesn't. This tuma was never began as an avatuma. So but he could have become an avatuma, and we're dealing with tuma that originally began as an avatuma. Look at food on the other hand, the kikar sheni, which was never was able to become an avatuma. Together, okay. So the Gemara says, so a earthenware vessel will make a point. 1 second. One second. One second. Okay, so Gemara says klicheres. Okay, so we'll make a point here from the type of tumah of a klicheres. Okay, what type of tumah do we find by klicheres? Hold on a moment here. Okay, so the Gemara says, so the Gemara makes the following point. If you look at a klicheres is able to create tumah and is able to make truma tamei, and moreover puzzle. And therefore, if a klicheres is able to make the truma puzzle, and a klicheres is not able to, is not susceptible to avatoma, we said the only thing that can become an avatoma is something that can go to the mikvah. An earthenware vessel can't go to the mikvah. Earthenware vessels that have become tamei are broken, they're shattered. So if a klicheres can make truma tamei, and a klicheres can't become an avatoma, so it's not so difficult to entertain the notion that a loaf of bread should be able to make truma tamei. In other words, it doesn't take a person who's susceptible to avatoma to make truma tamei, because look at a klicheres, it could make truma tamei, and it itself cannot become tamei avatoma. So a loaf of bread should be no different. So the Gemara says, "Malak klicheres became a tamei me'aviroi." Klicheres, you can't learn from klicheres. Klicheres has its own unique law. A klicheres has this new type of tumah called suspension, right? Metame me'aviroi. It becomes tamei by suspending something in its ear space. So the Gemara says, okay, you're right. So you can't learn it from klicheres, but you can learn it from both, a combination of tful yom and klicheres. Tful yom will prove because tful yom has regular type of tumah, touching, maga and medras, touching and pushing. The chazar din and loyroi zeh. Neither of them is comparable to each other. However, the common denominator of both of them is, 1 second. Let me just read. Rashi redoes the Gemara here. Let me just make sure I have the right version of the Gemara here. Okay. But it's a little bit different than the Gemara we have. Rashi has a tremendous amount of bone to pick here with the version of the text that we have. If you look, it's the bottom. It's actually, if you look at this page, both sides of the page are Rashi. Typically, if you have the original text, typically one side is Taisus, one side is Rashi. This page is full Rashi on both sides. You can imagine how much Rashi is on the page. And you look at the bottom Rashi in the right column. There is a lot to say about the variation. Rashi does not like the text of our Gemara at all. Okay, that being said, so just read. I'll tell you what Rashi's version of the text is. The tzad hashavit, the common denominator is that they're susceptible to tumah and they can make truma tamei. That's the common denominator. So too, a loaf of bread is susceptible to tumah and can make truma tamei. Okay, Shepaisa b'chulin the paisa b'truma. Okay. However, this kal v'chaimer is inherently flawed. This is the source to tell me that a loaf of bread can make truma into a shlishi, and it's a flawed kal v'chaimer. What's flawed about it? So the Gemara says, "V'dor achar," another generation is going to come and parach. They will negate this comparison. Why? Malat tzad hashavish behen. It's incomparable. Why? Shkenyesh behen tzad chomer. Because both klicheres and tful both have a unique stringency. Klicheres has a stringency of tumah of suspension, tumah ba'avir, and tful has a chumrah, has a stringency that it's susceptible to avatumah. Whereas, so maybe because they have these stringencies, that's why they can create truma into a shlishi. But a loaf of bread, which does not have any stringencies at all, maybe it can't make truma into a shlishi. So therefore, a future generation is going to negate this kal v'chaimer. Okay, so the Gemara concludes, Rabbi Yechim and Zakkai tzad chomer loy parach. Rabbi Yechim and Zakkai holds that this is not a valid methodology to end the kal v'chaimer, and therefore, according to Rabbi Yechim and Zakkai, there is no kal v'chaimer, and there is a valid source to say that truma is a shlishi. We'll take it.